The bullet missed Rebecca Morgan by less than an inch, splintering the wooden frame of the general store where she stood frozen in terror, her basket of eggs crashing to the dusty ground as chaos erupted in the streets of Williams, Arizona Territory in the scorching summer of 1881. She had only been in town for 3 weeks, arriving on the dusty stagecoach from St. Louis with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter of introduction to the local schoolteacher who had promised her work. The Wild West was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to prove herself capable and independent after years of being told she was too delicate, too nervous, too prone to failure. But now, as gunfire crackled through the afternoon air and men shouted and horses screamed, all she could think was that everyone back home had been right about her. A strong hand grabbed her arm and yanked her backwards into the shadowy interior of the store, just as another bullet whizzed past where she had been standing. "Stay down and stay quiet," a deep voice commanded, and Rebecca found herself pressed against shelves of dry goods, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She looked up at her rescuer through the dim light filtering through the store's dusty windows. He was tall, lean but muscular, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt. His eyes were an unexpected shade of gray-green, like sage after rain, and they regarded her with a mixture of concern and calculation. A silver star gleamed on his vest. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost gentle despite the violence still echoing outside. Rebecca shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her whole body was trembling. "Good. I'm Marshal Xander Irving. Those men out there are part of the Dalton gang. They have been causing trouble from here to Flagstaff. Just stay put until I deal with them." Before she could respond, he was moving toward the door with fluid grace, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Rebecca wanted to call out, to beg him not to go, but the words stuck in her throat. She was always like this, always freezing when action was needed, always disappointing people with her cowardice. The gunfight lasted only a few more minutes, though to Rebecca it felt like hours. She crouched behind the counter, her hands pressed over her ears, hating herself for her fear. When silence finally fell, she slowly stood on shaking legs and peered out the window. 3 men lay dead in the street, and Marshal Irving was talking to his deputy, a young man who could not have been more than 20. The marshal's face was grim but calm, as if this was just another day's work. As if death and danger were nothing to him. Rebecca slipped out of the store and hurried down the side alley toward the small house she rented behind the church, desperate to reach safety before anyone could see how badly she was shaking. She made it to her front step before the tears came, hot and shameful. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. She was not cut out for the West. She was going to fail here just like she had failed at everything else. That evening, as the sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, there was a knock at her door. Rebecca opened it to find Marshal Irving standing on her porch, his hat in his hands. "Miss, I wanted to check on you," he said. "You ran off before I could make sure you were all right." "I am fine, Marshal," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for your concern." He studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her careful composure to the frightened girl beneath. "You are new to Williams, are you not?" he asked. "Yes, I arrived 3 weeks ago. I am teaching at the school." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I heard we had a new schoolteacher. The children have been talking about you. They say you are kind, but that you seem nervous." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. Even the children had noticed her weakness. "I am still adjusting to life here. It can be rough, especially for someone from back east," Xander said. Today was not a normal occurrence, though. We do not usually have gunfights in the middle of town. I am sorry you had to witness that. You handled it very well, Rebecca said quietly. You were so calm, so capable. Something shifted in his expression. That is my job, miss, but I have been doing this for 8 years now. Everyone is scared their first time facing trouble like that. Rebecca doubted that. She could not imagine this confident, competent man ever being afraid of anything. Well, thank you again for saving my life, Marshal. I should prepare for tomorrow's lessons. She started to close the door, but he stopped her with a gentle hand. Miss Morgan, if you need anything, anything at all, you come find me. Williams is a good town with good people, but it can be dangerous for a woman alone. I want you to know you have someone looking out for you. The sincerity in his voice made Rebecca's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. That is very kind of you. After he left, she leaned against the closed door and let out a long breath. Marshal Xander Irving was unlike any man she had ever met. Back in St. Louis, the men of her acquaintance had been merchants and clerks, soft-handed and conventional. Xander was something else entirely, carved from harder material, shaped by a harsher world. And the way he had looked at her, with such gentle concern despite his obvious strength, made something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Over the following weeks, Rebecca threw herself into her teaching with determined focus. She had 23 students ranging from ages 6 to 15, the children of ranchers and shopkeepers and miners. They were rough around the edges but eager to learn, and Rebecca found that when she was focused on them, she could almost forget her own anxieties. Almost. But every unexpected sound, every raised voice, every sudden movement made her flinch. And she knew the children noticed, just as everyone in town seemed to notice. The other teachers at the school, 2 older women who had been in Arizona for decades, treated her with patient condescension, as if she were a child herself. The shopkeepers spoke to her slowly and carefully, as if she might break. Even Mrs. Patterson, her elderly landlady, kept asking if she was managing all right, if perhaps she might be happier back east. Rebecca wanted to scream that she was fine, that she could handle this, but the truth was she was not sure she could. Every day felt like a test she was failing. The only person who did not treat her like fragile porcelain was Marshal Irving. She saw him often as she walked to and from the schoolhouse, and he always tipped his hat and asked how she was doing. Sometimes he would walk alongside her for a block or two, telling her about the town or asking about her students. His presence made her feel safer, but it also made her more aware of her own inadequacy. He was so strong, so fearless, and she was so weak. One afternoon in late September, as the Arizona heat finally began to ease, Rebecca was locking up the schoolhouse when she heard shouting from the direction of the saloon. Her hands began to shake immediately, the keys slipping from her fingers and falling into the dust. She bent to retrieve it, her heart racing, memories of that terrible day flooding back. Miss Morgan. She jumped violently, spinning around to find Xander standing a few feet away, concern etched on his handsome face. I am sorry, I did not mean to startle you, he said, moving closer. Are you all right? I am fine, Rebecca said automatically, but her voice came out too high, too breathless. She clutched the key so hard the metal bit into her palm. Xander glanced toward the saloon where the shouting had died down to loud laughter. Just some cowboys celebrating payday, he said. Nothing to worry about. Rebecca nodded, but she could not stop the trembling in her hands. She saw Xander notice it, saw something like understanding flash across his face. Walk with me, he asked gently. She wanted to refuse, to maintain her dignity, but she found herself nodding. They walked in silence for a while, leaving the main street behind and heading toward the edge of town where the land opened up into rolling hills covered in scrub brush and juniper trees. The setting sun turned everything golden, and the air smelled of dust and sage. "You know," Xander said finally, "when I first came to Arizona, I was terrified." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "I cannot imagine you being afraid of anything." A wry smile crossed his face. "I was 19 years old and fresh from a farm in Ohio. I had never seen a place so wild, so empty. The space itself scared me, and the first time I saw a man shot, I threw up in the street. Truly, truly. My training officer laughed at me for days. Told me I would never make it as a lawman if I could not handle a little blood." "But you did make it," Rebecca said. "Eventually. It took time and practice and a lot of mistakes, but I learned that being afraid does not make you weak. It just makes you human." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his gray-green eyes serious. "What happened the day you arrived, that was traumatic. It would shake anyone up. There is no shame in still feeling the effects of it." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Everyone thinks I am too fragile for the West. And they are right. I freeze up whenever anything happens. I am a disappointment." "To who?" Xander asked sharply. "To everyone, to myself." She wiped angrily at her eyes. "I came here to prove I could be strong and independent, but all I have proven is that I am the same scared little girl I have always been." Xander was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he said, very softly, "You are one of the bravest people I have met." Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. "How can you say that? You have seen how I am." "I have seen a woman who packed up her entire life and moved to an unknown territory to start over. I have seen a teacher who handles a classroom full of wild children with patience and kindness every single day. I have seen someone who, despite being afraid, keeps showing up and doing what needs to be done. That is courage, Miss Morgan. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what you need to do despite the fear." His words hit something deep inside her, and the tears came harder now. She turned away, embarrassed, but Xander gently touched her shoulder. "You could never disappoint me," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "Not by being human, not by being afraid." Rebecca turned back to him, and in the golden light of the setting sun she saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it. He truly meant it. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood there for a moment that stretched and softened, and Rebecca became suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his eyes had darkened as he looked at her. Her heart began to race again, but this time it had nothing to do with fear. Xander cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should get you home before it gets dark." As they walked back to her house, Rebecca felt something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. And despite all her fears and insecurities, she found herself hoping that line would not be redrawn. Over the next several weeks, Xander found reasons to be near the schoolhouse more often. He would stop by during lunch to check on things, or he would happen to be passing by when school let out. Rebecca knew the other teachers had noticed, and she saw them exchanging knowing glances. The whole town would be talking soon if they were not already. She should have been mortified, but instead she felt a warm glow whenever she saw him. They talked about everything, sitting on the schoolhouse steps in the afternoon sun or walking the quiet streets in the evening. He told her about his life in Ohio, about the family farm he had left behind, about his younger sister who wrote him long letters full of gossip and affection. She told him about St. Louis, about her parents who had died when she was 18, about the aunt who had raised her and constantly despaired of her nervous disposition. She meant well, Rebecca said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars come out. but she always made me feel like I was broken somehow, like I needed to be fixed. You do not need fixing, Xander said firmly. You are perfect as you are. Rebecca's heart fluttered. They were sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and she could feel the heat of him even in the cooling night air. You barely know me, Marshal. I know enough, he said, turning to look at her. And I would like to know more if you will let me. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Rebecca knew what he was asking, and fear rose up in her throat. What if she disappointed him? What if he saw all her flaws and weaknesses and realized she was not worth his time? What if she was not brave enough for a man like him? But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and vulnerability there, she found herself nodding. I would like that too. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun rising, and when he reached out and gently took her hand, Rebecca felt something inside her chest crack open and bloom. They courted properly after that, with Sunday afternoon walks and dinners at the hotel restaurant and church socials where the whole town watched them with amused interest. Xander was respectful and patient, never pushing her too fast, always giving her space to adjust to this new development. But Rebecca could feel the intensity of his feelings in every glance, every casual touch, every word he spoke to her. And her own feelings were growing too, deeper and stronger than anything she had ever experienced. When she was with Xander, she felt safer, calmer, more like the person she wanted to be. But that only made her more terrified of losing him. The crisis came in late October, when a group of outlaws rode into Williams intent on robbing the bank. Rebecca heard the commotion from her classroom and immediately ordered the children under their desks, her voice shaking but firm. Through the window, she could see armed men on horseback firing their guns into the air, shouting threats. And she could see Xander walking out into the street to face them alone. Terror seized her, squeezing her chest until she could not breathe. This was different from the last time. This time, she knew the man putting himself in danger. This time she cared desperately about the outcome. Miss Morgan, I am scared, one of the younger children whimpered. Rebecca forced herself to focus. The children needed her. Xander was doing his job and she needed to do hers. It is going to be all right, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The marshal will handle this. We just need to stay quiet and stay down. She moved between the desks, reassuring each child, keeping their attention on her instead of the terrifying sounds outside. She told them a story, making it up as she went along, about a brave knight and a clever princess, and a dragon that was not really scary once you got to know it. She kept her voice calm and soothing even as gunshots cracked through the air, even as her heart screamed for her to run to the window, to see if Xander was all right. The whole ordeal lasted perhaps 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally, the shooting stopped, and she heard Xander's voice calling out that it was safe. Rebecca stood on trembling legs and looked out the window to see him standing in the street, very much alive, directing his deputy to secure the would-be robbers. Relief hit her so hard she had to grip the windowsill to stay upright. She dismissed the children early, making sure each one was safely collected by a parent. When the last student had gone, she sank down into her chair and let herself shake. The door opened and Xander stepped inside, his face tight with concern. Rebecca, are you all right? The children. Everyone is fine, she managed. You, not a scratch. He crossed the room quickly and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I am sorry you had to go through that again. I thought you were going to die, Rebecca whispered. I thought I was going to lose you. I am all right, he said gently. This is my job, Rebecca. This is what I do. I know. She looked down at their joined hands. And I know I should be brave about it. I should be able to watch you walk into danger without falling apart, but I cannot. I am so afraid all the time, and I hate it. I hate being this way." Xander was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The other teachers told me how you handled things. How you kept the children calm and safe, how you never let them see you were afraid. That was brave, Rebecca. That was exactly what needed to be done. But I was terrified." "So was I," he said simply. Rebecca looked up in shock. "What?" "I am always afraid when I go up against armed men," Xander said. "Every single time. I am afraid I will be shot. I am afraid I will fail to protect people. And lately, I am afraid I will die before I get to tell you how much you mean to me." Rebecca's breath caught. "Xander." He stood, pulling her to her feet, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "I am in love with you, Rebecca Morgan. I have been falling in love with you since the first day I pulled you into that general store. You are smart and kind and stronger than you know. And yes, you are afraid sometimes, but that does not make you weak. You face your fear every single day and you keep going. That is the definition of courage." Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but they were different tears than before. "I am in love with you too," she whispered. "So much it terrifies me, because I do not think I could bear it if something happened to you. And I am afraid I will disappoint you, that I will not be strong enough for this life for you." "You could never disappoint me," Xander said fiercely. "Never, do you hear me? You are everything I could ever want, everything I never knew I needed." And then he was kissing her, and Rebecca was kissing him back, and all her fear dissolved into this moment of perfect connection. His lips were warm and firm, his hands gentle but insistent as he pulled her closer. She wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself fall into the kiss, into him, into this wild and terrifying and wonderful feeling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Rebecca let out a breathless laugh. "That was not a very romantic proposal, Marshal." "I will do it properly later," he promised, "with a ring and everything, but I need to know right now. Will you marry me, Rebecca? Will you take a chance on us?" Rebecca thought about all her fears, all her insecurities, all the ways she had been told she was not enough. And then she thought about this man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her anyway, who believed in her strength even when she did not believe in it herself. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was pure joy, and when he kissed her again, Rebecca felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. They were married on a crisp November day in the little church on Main Street. Half the town showed up, cramming into the wooden pews to watch their Marshal marry the nervous schoolteacher from St. Louis. Rebecca wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered from the catalog, and Xander wore his Sunday best with his Marshal star polished to a shine. As Rebecca walked down the aisle, she saw Xander waiting for her at the altar, and the look on his face took her breath away. There was so much love there, so much certainty. He believed in her. He believed in them. The ceremony was short and sweet, conducted by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. When it came time for the vows, Rebecca's voice was steady as she promised to love and cherish this man for the rest of her days. And when Xander slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and said, "You could never disappoint me," she believed him. The reception was held in the hotel dining room, with music and dancing and more food than Rebecca had seen in months. She danced with Xander, with his deputy, with several of her students' fathers, but always her eyes found her husband across the room. Her husband. The word felt strange and wonderful in her mind. As the evening wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Xander leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Irving, Mrs. Irving." Another strange and wonderful thing. Rebecca nodded, and they slipped out the back door into the cool night air. Xander had prepared a surprise for her. While they had been at the church, some of his friends had moved Rebecca's belongings from her little rental house to Xander's place, a neat two-story home on the edge of town with a wraparound porch and a view of the mountains. He had spent the past week painting and cleaning and fixing everything up, wanting it to be perfect for his bride. "It is beautiful," Rebecca breathed as he carried her over the threshold. And it was, warm and welcoming with oil lamps glowing and a fire crackling in the hearth. "Not as beautiful as you," Xander said, setting her down gently. He looked nervous suddenly, and Rebecca realized with a start that he was afraid of disappointing her too. This strong, confident man was worried about their wedding night. She reached up and touched his face, letting all her love show in her eyes. "I am exactly where I want to be," she said, "with exactly who I want to be with." The tension in his shoulders eased and he smiled. "So am I." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Rebecca let herself melt into it. They had been so careful with each other during their courtship, never more than chaste kisses, respecting the boundaries of propriety. But now those boundaries were gone, and as Xander's hands moved to her hair, pulling out the pins that held it up, Rebecca felt heat bloom through her entire body. They made their way upstairs to the bedroom, shedding clothes as they went, touching and exploring with wonder and desire. Rebecca had been nervous about this part, about whether she would measure up, whether she would know what to do. But with Xander, it all felt natural and right. He was gentle but passionate, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable, whispering words of love and encouragement that made her feel cherished and desired. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the big bed, moonlight streaming through the window. Rebecca rested her head on Xander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I can say." "I am still going to be afraid sometimes," Rebecca said, "when you are in danger. When things go wrong, I am still going to struggle." "I know," Xander said. "And I am still going to be there, reminding you how strong you are every single time you forget." Rebecca smiled against his skin. "You could never disappoint me either, you know, in case I have not made that clear." She felt him laugh, the vibration rumbling through his chest. "Good to know." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Rebecca felt more at peace than she had in years. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, as all marriages are. Rebecca continued teaching, though she moved to the larger classroom to accommodate more students as the town grew. Xander continued his work as marshal, dealing with everything from bar fights to cattle rustlers, to the occasional outlaw passing through. Rebecca still struggled with fear when he was in danger, but she learned to manage it better. She threw herself into her work, into building their home, into making friends with the other women in town. And Xander was always there when she needed him, solid and steady, reminding her of her own strength. They had their first real argument in January, when Xander came home with a bullet graze across his ribs and tried to pretend it was nothing. Rebecca had been terrified and angry, furious that he had taken such a risk, desperate to make him understand how important he was to her. "I cannot lose you," she had cried, tears streaming down her face as she bandaged the wound. "Do you understand that? I cannot lose you." "You will not lose me," Xander had said, catching her hands. "I promise, Rebecca, I will always come home to you." "You cannot promise that," she said bitterly. "No one can promise that." "Then I promise this," he said, looking into her eyes. "I promise I will be as careful as I can be. I promise I will never take unnecessary risks. And I promise that coming home to you is the most important thing in my world." It was not perfect, but it was enough. Rebecca threw her arms around him, careful of his injury, and held on tight. "I am sorry I am not braver," she whispered. "And I am sorry I scared you," he said. "But Rebecca, you are so much braver than you think. You handled this. You patched me up. You did not fall apart." He was right, she realized with surprise. She had been terrified, but she had functioned. She had done what needed to be done. "You are good for me," she said. "We are good for each other," he corrected. Spring came to Arizona territory with a riot of wildflowers turning the desert into a carpet of gold and purple. Rebecca discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Xander's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such tenderness it made her cry. "Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Rebecca, everything I ever wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 3 months, and the Arizona heat made the summer months nearly unbearable. But Xander was attentive and loving, bringing her cool water and sitting with her when she felt ill, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of long days. She stopped teaching in July, when it became too difficult to stand for long periods. The townspeople threw her a party, the children presenting her with a quilt they had all helped make, each square decorated with their drawings and messages. Rebecca cried and hugged each one, touched by their affection. The baby came in late October, after a long and difficult labor that left Rebecca exhausted and Xander pale with worry. But when the midwife placed their son in Rebecca's arms, everything else faded away. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and Xander's gray-green eyes. "What should we name him?" Xander asked, his voice rough with emotion as he sat beside her on the bed. "What about James?" Rebecca suggested. "After your father." "James Irving," Xander tested the name. "It is perfect." "He is perfect. You are perfect." He leaned down and kissed her gently. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for this gift." Rebecca looked down at their son, then up at her husband, and felt overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, she had been so afraid, so convinced she would fail at everything. But here she was, a wife, a mother, a woman who had built a life in the Wild West. She still got scared sometimes. She still had moments of doubt. But she had also learned that fear did not define her, that courage was not about never being afraid but about continuing despite the fear. "You were right, you know," she said softly. "About what? I could never disappoint you, because you love me for who I am, not for who you want me to be." Xander smiled, that warm, wonderful smile that had captured her heart. "You could never," he agreed. "Not in a million years." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a rambunctious toddler with his father's fearless nature and his mother's tender heart. Rebecca went back to teaching when he was 2, bringing him along to the schoolhouse where he played quietly in the corner while she led lessons. The older students doted on him, and he became the unofficial mascot of the school. Xander continued as marshal, eventually training a new deputy when his old one moved to Flagstaff to take a job as sheriff. The territory was slowly becoming more settled, less wild, and while there were still dangers, they were not as frequent or as violent as they had been. Rebecca's confidence grew with each passing year. She took on leadership roles in the community, organizing socials and fundraisers, advocating for improvements to the school. The nervous, frightened girl from St. Louis was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned her own strength. In 1884, Rebecca gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Xander's mother. She had Xander's coloring but Rebecca's delicate features, and she was spoiled shamelessly by both her parents and her older brother. 2 is enough, Rebecca declared after a particularly difficult birth, and Xander readily agreed. They had their hands full with James, who at 3 was already climbing everything he could reach, and tiny Sarah, who had impressive lungs and knew how to use them. But Rebecca had never been happier. Her life was chaotic and exhausting and completely different from anything she had imagined growing up in St. Louis. But it was hers, built with her own hands and her own courage. In 1886, Arizona was still a territory, but talk of statehood was growing. Williams was thriving, with new businesses opening and more families moving in. The railroad was coming, which would bring even more change. Xander had been approached about running for territorial marshal, a position that would give him authority over a much larger area. "What do you think?" he asked Rebecca one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The children were asleep inside, and it was a rare moment of peace. "I think you would be wonderful at it," Rebecca said honestly. "But I also think you should only do it if it is what you want." Xander was quiet for a moment. "It would mean more travel, more time away from you and the children." "Then the question is whether the opportunity is worth the sacrifice," Rebecca said. He turned to look at her, taking her hand. "Nothing is worth sacrificing time with you." Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling with love. "That is the right answer, Marshal Irving." "I thought it might be," he said, grinning. Then his expression turned serious. "I have been thinking about something else, actually." "What would you say to moving to Prescott? I have been offered the sheriff position there. It is a bigger town, more established, better schools for the children." Rebecca considered this. Prescott was the territorial capital, a larger and more cosmopolitan place than Williams. Part of her felt a flutter of her old anxiety at the thought of such a big change, but a larger part, the part that had grown strong over these years, felt excited. "I think it sounds like an adventure," she said. Xander's face lit up. "Really? You are not afraid?" "Oh, I am terrified," Rebecca said honestly. "But I have learned that being afraid is not a reason not to do something, and besides, I will have you with me." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Rebecca said, laughing. "Then I am falling down on the job," he murmured against her lips. They moved to Prescott in the spring of 1887. It was a difficult transition at first. The house Xander had bought was larger but needed work. James struggled to adjust to a new school. Sarah, now 3, clung to Rebecca constantly, afraid of all the new people and places. But slowly they settled in. Rebecca found work at one of the better schools in Prescott, teaching older students this time. Xander took to his new role as sheriff with his usual competence, earning respect quickly. They made new friends, became part of a new community, and through it all they had each other. One evening in the summer of their first year in Prescott, Rebecca was helping James with his arithmetic homework while Sarah played with her dolls nearby. Xander came home late, tired from a long day, but his face brightened when he saw his family gathered around the kitchen table. "How was your day?" Rebecca asked, rising to greet him with a kiss. "Long," he admitted, "but better now. How about yours?" "The school board approved my proposal for a lending library," Rebecca said excitedly. "We can start ordering books next month." "That is wonderful," Xander said, genuine pride in his voice. "You are going to change so many lives with that." "Papa, can you help me with this problem?" James asked, holding up his slate. "Mama explained it, but I still do not understand." Xander sat down and began working through the math with his son while Rebecca started preparing dinner. Sarah abandoned her dolls and climbed into her mother's lap, sucking her thumb and watching her father and brother. It was such an ordinary moment, so simple and domestic. But Rebecca felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost overwhelmed her. This was her life. This was what she had built from fear and hope and love. These people were hers and she was theirs, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream of. Later, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and Xander sat together in their bedroom. She was brushing out her hair, now threaded with just a few silver strands despite her relative youth. Xander was cleaning his gun, a nightly ritual she had long since grown accustomed to. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me, taking on someone so afraid all the time." Xander looked at her in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" Rebecca shrugged. "I was just thinking about how patient you have had to be with me over the years. How many times you have had to reassure me, comfort me. You could have had someone braver, stronger." Xander set down the gun and came to sit beside her on the bed. He took the brush from her hand and gently began running it through her hair himself, a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten. "Rebecca Irving, you are the bravest, strongest person I know," he said firmly. "You left everything familiar to start a new life in a wild place. You married a lawman knowing the dangers. You have given birth to 2 children. You have built a home and a career and a life that matters. And yes, you get afraid sometimes. So what? Everyone gets afraid. The difference is that you keep going anyway." "You make it sound so noble," Rebecca said, smiling despite herself. "It is noble," Xander insisted, "and I have never, not once, regretted marrying you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." He set down the brush and turned her to face him. "You could never disappoint me, remember? I told you that the first time I said I loved you, and it is still true. It will always be true." Rebecca leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "So much." "I love you too," he said. "Now and always." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded between them. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the darkness, Rebecca thought about how far she had come. The frightened girl who had arrived in Williams all those years ago would barely recognize the woman she had become. But Xander had recognized her, had seen her potential when she could not see it herself. He had believed in her strength when she had no belief of her own. And in doing so, he had helped her become the person she was always meant to be. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, though by then Xander had retired from law enforcement, his body bearing too many scars from too many years of danger. They bought a small ranch outside of Prescott, where Xander raised horses and Rebecca continued teaching until her own retirement in 1915. James grew up to become a lawyer, marrying a lovely young woman from Phoenix and giving them 3 grandchildren. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, opening a school for girls in Tucson and dedicating her life to education. Both children were sources of enormous pride for their parents. But through everything, through all the changes and challenges and joys and sorrows, the constant was their love for each other. Xander never stopped telling Rebecca how strong she was, how brave, how much he admired her. And Rebecca never stopped being grateful for the man who had seen past her fear to the woman beneath. In 1925, on their 43rd wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. They were both in their 60s now, graying and weathered by years of desert sun, but their hands were still intertwined and their love was still as strong as ever. "You remember the day we met?" Rebecca asked, her voice soft with memory. "How could I forget?" Xander said. "You were standing outside the general store with eggs all over your feet, looking absolutely terrified." "I was terrified," Rebecca admitted, "of everything. The gunfight, the West, my new life, myself mostly. And look at you now, Xander said, squeezing her hand. You have touched so many lives with your teaching. You have raised two incredible children. You have built a legacy that will outlast both of us. We have built it together, Rebecca corrected. I could never have done any of it without you. Maybe, Xander allowed. But I think you underestimate yourself still. You always were stronger than you knew. Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had been her rock, her champion, her love for more than 4 decades. His face was lined now, his hair silver, but his eyes were still that remarkable gray-green that had captured her heart in 1881. And the love in those eyes was undimmed by time. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For never letting me disappoint you. For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. For loving me exactly as I am." Xander lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You could never disappoint me," he said, just as he had said so many times over the years. "Never. You are everything I ever wanted, everything I ever needed. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes, but they were happy tears. "And loving you has been mine." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, having come to visit for the anniversary celebration. In a little while they would go in and join the family, eat cake, open presents, celebrate another year together. But for now, they simply sat and held hands and remembered. They remembered the young Marshal and the frightened schoolteacher who had found each other in a dusty Arizona town. They remembered the fear and the courage, the challenges and the triumphs, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones. They remembered falling in love, and they celebrated the fact that they were still in love, 43 years later. As the darkness deepened and the stars multiplied overhead, Rebecca leaned her head on Xander's shoulder and smiled. She had spent so much of her early life afraid of disappointing people, afraid of not being enough. But Xander had taught her that love was not about being perfect. It was about being real, being present, being willing to try even when you were afraid. "Thank you for choosing me," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me," Xander replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I would choose you again in every lifetime, my love, every single time." And sitting there in the Arizona darkness, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Rebecca knew that she would choose him too. Despite all her fears and doubts, despite all the times she had been certain she would fail, she had succeeded in the one thing that mattered most. She had loved and been loved in return. She had found her courage in the Wild West, and she had found it in the eyes of a cowboy turned marshal who had looked at her and seen not weakness but strength, not failure but potential, not disappointment but promise. Xander Irving had told her she could never disappoint him, and in all their years together, she had come to believe him. More than that, she had come to believe in herself, and that, Rebecca thought as she sat surrounded by love and starlight, was the greatest gift of all. The evening air was cool and perfect, and inside the house their family waited, carrying on the legacy of love that she and Xander had created. Their story was not one of perfection but of persistence, not of fearlessness but of courage in the face of fear. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard work and harder choices, of danger and determination. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and true. As they finally rose to join their family, Xander took Rebecca's face in his weathered hands and kissed her one more time under the Arizona stars. And in that kiss was everything they had been, everything they were, and everything they would always be to each other. "I love you, Rebecca Irving," he said. "And I love you, Xander Irving," she replied. Today, tomorrow, and always. Together, hand in hand as they had been for 43 years, they walked back into their house, into the light and laughter and love that filled every corner. Behind them, the desert stretched vast and beautiful under the endless sky. The same wild landscape where two frightened people had found each other and discovered that love could conquer even the deepest fears. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened carefully, you might have heard the echo of words spoken long ago in a dusty Arizona town, words that had changed two lives forever. You could never disappoint me. Never. Those words had been Xander's promise to Rebecca, and he had kept that promise every day of their marriage. But they had also been Rebecca's gift to herself, the permission she had needed to be imperfect, to be afraid, to be human. In the end, that was what their story was really about. Not about a fearless hero and a damsel in distress, but about two real people with real flaws and real fears who chose to love each other anyway. Who chose to believe in each other when belief was hard, to support each other when support was needed, to stand together against whatever came. The Wild West had been their backdrop, with all its danger and beauty and possibility. But the real adventure had been the journey they took together, from fear to courage, from doubt to certainty, from loneliness to love. And as the years continued to pass and eventually, in their 80s, they faced the final frontier together, first Xander and then Rebecca. They did so knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. They left behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying pieces of their story forward into the future. But more than that, they left behind the knowledge that love could transform lives, that courage could be learned, and that two imperfect people could create something perfect together. The little house in Williams where their story began eventually fell to ruin, and the ranch in Prescott passed to their descendants. But the love that had started in those places lived on, a legacy more enduring than wood or stone. And sometimes, on cool Arizona evenings when the stars shine bright and the desert wind whispers through the sage, you might hear an echo of their story, a reminder that true love endures, that courage is born from fear, and that the most important words we can say to those we love are simple and true. You could never disappoint me. Never. That promise, kept faithfully over a lifetime, was the foundation on which Rebecca and Xander Irving built their extraordinary, ordinary life. It was the bedrock of their love story, the theme of their shared song, the truth that carried them through every trial and celebrated with them in every triumph. In the end, that is what the Wild West taught them, what their life together proved beyond any doubt. That love, real love, sees us as we truly are and cherishes us not despite our fears but with them, knowing that our vulnerability is not a weakness but a strength, not a flaw but a feature of our humanity. Rebecca had been afraid of disappointing him. The cowboy, the marshal, the man who became her husband and the love of her life, had said she never could. And in the proving of that promise, in the living of that truth, they had found something rare and precious and real. They had found each other, and that made all the difference.